Many thought it would never happen again, but after 946 days, Lewis Hamilton's winless streak is over after winning a quite incredible British Grand Prix, and in doing so, breaks the record for most wins at one venue. From RacingNews365.com, my name is Nick Golding, and I'm joined, as always, by lead editor Ian Parks. Ian, a quite incredible British Grand Prix. It had everything. We had sunshine, we had rain, we had slick tyres, we had intermediates. And at the end of the day, we had Lewis Hamilton at probably the most emotional we have ever heard him.
I was going to say, Nick, we had water falling from the sky, and we pretty much had water falling from Lewis' eyes as well. I genuinely cannot recall in all my time covering Lewis Hamilton, and I've been reporting on Lewis since his very first season in 2007. I was there for that first Grand Prix when he started out on his quite remarkable F1 career. I've covered many of his title victories, and you're right, Nick, I do not recall him sobbing like a baby like he did over the team radio, first of all, when he got out of the car in the arms of his father. Just a remarkable outpouring of emotion. And I think it comes as well from just this sense of utter relief that he has finally won a Grand Prix yet again. As you said, 946 days, the 2021 Saudi Arabian Grand Prix, which of course was the race before the season-defining Grand Prix in Abu Dhabi that particular year. The one that we know where Lewis lost that title and Max won it in very controversial circumstances. And he's had to wait all this time, 2 years of just abject misery with Mercedes following the introduction of the aerodynamic regulations at the start of 2022. Then finally, Mercedes has managed to get itself on this path again. He's seen George take poles, he's seen George win Grand Prix, and now he had the opportunity in his hands and he took it just brilliantly. I felt today it was a classic Lewis Hamilton performance, defying his 39 years of age, defying the critics who said he was done, his time was over, he was only going to Ferrari for effectively a grand final payday. And here we have it. Just a superb day for Lewis, for Mercedes, and in my book, truly well-deserved for perseverance, for patience, for, he discussed it himself to a certain extent, the mental struggles that he has had to go through over this past 2.5 years, just simply on occasion to get himself out of bed, to keep training, to keep pushing for that victory, and finally he has got his just reward today.
Well, it was very much, as you mentioned, a typical Lewis drive at his very best when those around him faltered and some teams made incorrect decisions. It was Hamilton who rose to the occasion to claim his 104th Formula One victory. It has been so long since we saw him on top, and I think something that was so beautiful in a way about today is that not every fan likes Lewis Hamilton. Obviously, a lot of people's opinions changed during 2021 and that titanic fight with Max Verstappen. But what was incredible was on social media after the race, fans of all drivers, including Max, were quick to celebrate and, congratulate Lewis on what was a win that clearly meant possibly more to him than maybe the 103 prior to that.
You could argue that might be the case. Of course, many of those wins have led to those 7 titles that he's accrued over his remarkable career. But as you say, it wasn't just the outpouring of emotion from Lewis. It was the outpouring of emotion from the hundreds of thousands of fans here at Silverstone. You could see that final lap when they knew that he'd got that victory in the bag, despite Max closing in and threatening to snatch that victory from Lewis at the death because of that different tyre strategy they were both on in that final stint. Every fan here pretty much rose to their feet to stand and cheer and applaud, because I think they recognise as well what Lewis has been through this past 2.5 years. I mean, Lewis said it himself. He even doubted himself whether he was going to win a Grand Prix again. Such has been the difficulties that he has been through, that the team has been through as well. The 1,300 people at Brackley and Brixworth, just down the road here from Silverstone, what they've gone through as well over this past 2.5 years, to pull that team back to the front and to give Lewis and George, again, a winning machine, because it has no doubt been an absolute struggle for everybody within Mercedes. To see all those fans today rising to salute Lewis and applaud him over to the checkered flag was, again, just one of the best scenes I've seen in a long time in all my years covering Formula One.
And we've got to mention, obviously, Lewis was very much pushed to the end by Max Verstappen. Of course, the way the race panned out, it started in the dry. It then started raining, but not enough for the intermediates. All of a sudden, it intensified, resulting in everyone boxing for the intermediates. Before suddenly the sun came out, the track started drying, and we saw a late change back to slick tyres. Of course, in Max's case, he went for hard tyres. In Lewis and Lando's case, they went for softs. And obviously, we'll talk about Lando in a few minutes. But we saw Max charging like an absolute lion in the closing laps. The gap, the deficit he had to Lewis coming down corner by corner just didn't quite get there. But on a weekend where Red Bull have not been at their best, Max Verstappen has admitted that himself. Christian Horner has said that they weren't expecting a victory this weekend. Verstappen has still left Silverstone, having extended his championship lead once again.
Yeah, got to give credit to what Max almost pulled off, because it was an incredible final stint. As you say, when that rain shower finally relented and it came to that switchover, we saw Lewis and Max come in at the same time. And there was this remarkable difference in tyre strategy. As you said, Lewis softs, Max on the hards. Lando came in a lap later and he also went for softs. And at that stage, the call was effectively Lando's to make, although it was in conjunction with the team as well over the radio. And they kind of said to Lando, do you want the mediums to prevent Max attacking you, or do you want the softs to try and go after Lewis? And we actually didn't hear that radio response from Lando. We heard that particular message that I've just referred to there from the team. And it was only when he actually pitted and we saw him go onto the softs that we recognised what his plan was, or the team's plan, which they have now admitted was a mistake, to try and go after Lewis. Ultimately, what happened is his softs started to go. He was unable to eke out the life that Lewis quite magnificently did on his own set of softs, because when you saw Lando being reeled in by Max, it looked then as if it was only going to be a matter of time before Max caught up to the back of Lewis, got the DRS and passed him, because you felt that if Lando's softs are going, Lewis's are going to go as well. But the stint he produced, the consistency of lap times from Lewis over that final stint, as I say, was metronomic in its almost perfection. So whilst we often praise Max for some of the performances that he has produced, and particularly we've seen Red Bull go through a little bit of a struggle of late, and we've praised Max for his performances. We've praised Red Bull for their tactics. They almost got it right again today, but without a shadow of a doubt, as I say, we've given Max so much credit. This is a day when we have to give Lewis Hamilton in particular and Mercedes credit for the calls they make. But for me, it was Lewis on that soft stint. The way he managed to eke that out, that tyre life, was just probably one of his better stints that we've seen over his entire Formula One career, to grab that emotional, career-defining in some respects victory, because it just highlights everything about Lewis and what he has stood for and how he has raced over these past 17 years.
Absolutely. And of course, we need to discuss Lando, because he did lead the race at one point, obviously for a large portion of it. And it did seem like he perhaps was going to catch Lewis. But as you mentioned there, he chose the soft compound as well, despite having a set of fresh mediums. And even Lewis in the cool-down room after the race kind of questioned Lando, why didn't you go for the medium tight? It does feel like that is a decision that has massively cost Lando and McLaren. And once again, Lando was very, very hard on himself after the race in the media pen and was, just visibly, just emotionally drained. And we've seen this side of Lando a few times now where he's so hard on himself. And interestingly, Jenson Button, obviously 2009 world champion, even said on Sky Sports F1 that Lando kind of needs to get out of doing this because it almost shows a weakness to his rivals.
Yeah, we've discussed this in depth before, where we've talked about Lando and the fact that really he needs to let it go. Well, yeah, okay, let's give him that degree of emotional reflection as soon as he come out of the car, because you've got to think that these guys are getting literally within minutes of stepping out the car. The adrenaline that must still be coursing through their veins, the emotions that they're going through, and the replays that they're probably going through as well in their headers. We could have done this. We could have done that. We should have done that. We should have done this. And they must be wondering as well, just as I say, it's total turmoil sometimes. And it's almost, I think, very, very hard on them to speak to them the moment they've just got out of the car. But as you say, Lando does have this habit. And you're right, he's got to start learning. And I think he is to a certain extent, but he almost wears his heart on his sleeve a bit too much. But I don't mind that with him. I think I like to see that within a sports person. I don't want to see a guy get out of a car or speak like 10, 20 minutes, as they do in the driver's pen, and almost be robotic with their comments. We want to see emotion. We want to see a driver putting themselves out there to explain why things either went well, or in Lando's case today, they didn't go well. But yes, perhaps, and he knows it himself because he has said it, he is a little bit too hard on himself. Perhaps that's something that he needs to dial out. And you've got to only assume that with greater experience, it will eventually come. But yeah, another one for Lando to reflect on, as he did in Austria just a week ago, as to the win that potentially got away there. And this was another one that you could argue, say, because he led the race twice, that he had the opportunity to come through and take this victory on home soil. But at least he did turn around and say, there will be many more opportunities. So at least that is a positive, even if there was a quite considerable degree of negative coming from him in the immediate aftermath.
Definitely. And we need to mention the final British driver, George Russell, started from pole, led the opening stages, unfortunately retired mid-race due to a water system issue. Quite ironic, given that it was raining at the time. But a disappointing day for George, given how well he did on Saturday to claim pole position. The fact that up until his retirement, whilst he had fallen back a few places, he was in with a great chance of a podium.
He was definitely in with a great chance of a podium. He was definitely in, arguably, with a shot of the win, because
possibly,
who knows how might played out, when that second belt of rain came across, what strategy Mercedes and George might have deployed in those closing stages. It comes a week after what happened in Austria, where he effectively inherited a win there. But it's, as we discussed last week, Nick, you've got to be in it to win it. You've got to be there at the death, and he was there at the death in Austria. 1 week later, complete change of emotions, effectively as well, because he'd started on pole. This is his home race. Of course he's going to want to win it, and naturally you can understand his disappointment. But the bottom line is, after that win there in Austria, after the pole position here for George at Silverstone, the win for Lewis, the defining line that came out of Toto Wolff in his post-race media debrief was that Mercedes is back. And I think now we can quite comfortably say that is most definitely the case. They are in this fight, 4 poles, 4 wins, alongside Red Bull, alongside McLaren. We're at the halfway point of the season, and if the next 12 races are anywhere as good as the last few we've seen, arguably since the Miami Grand Prix onwards, when Lando Norris won that race on the back of an upgrade package delivered by the team, and some of the performances and the drives we've seen over these past few Grand Prix, then we should be in for an absolutely cracking second half of the season. I, for one, can't wait for that, because it is just tremendous right now for all of us in the sport, to us as media to report on, for you as the fans to watch and comment on as well, because you must be absolutely fascinated by all of this that's going on, thrilled to some degree, because finally we now have this really titanic fight, not just arguably for the titles. Yes, Max has increased his lead slightly, but now we've got, as I say, McLaren in this fight for Grand Prix wins, poles, Mercedes back in this fight for Grand Prix wins and for poles. So it really is now a 3-team battle for the honours over any of the remaining 12 Grand Prix that we've got coming up.
And obviously, yeah, a team you didn't mention, are Ferrari, and another really difficult day for them. Carlos Sainz finished 5th, and he got the fastest lap. Charles Leclerc outside the points, and suffered a similar fate to Sergio Perez, where those two drivers gambled when the rain first started. At the time, it was quite light. It wasn't heavy enough to impact the circuit. It was still performing for the slick tyre runners. But they both gambled for a set of intermediates, which meant by the time the rain did intensify and the track was in a place where intermediates were needed, their intermediates were shot, that they were done.
Yeah, it was too early at pit stop. They gambled effectively with Charles. Charles had started from 11th on the grid, if I remember correctly.
Yeah.
And it was a gamble. And it was a gamble that obviously failed. Sometimes you just have to take risks. We saw Red Bull try and do the same with Checo Perez as well. He started from the pit lane. He was due to start 19th after another shocking qualifying, that spin at Copse into the gravel where he beached his RB20, couldn't escape. Was, as I say, 19th on the grid. Red Bull decided to change some power unit components because they felt, well, we might as well, give him that opportunity at least. So we started from the pit lane because those changes were made on the part from A. Started on the hard compound tyre, the only driver to do so. A tried for a different strategy, but as we saw, both Red Bull and Ferrari got it wrong with Checo and with Charles, and it just didn't play out for them today. At least Carlos produced an okay drive to 5th. That wasn't too bad for them. You could say that was the best they could have hoped for. Would have likely been 6th if George had finished, of course. So they've got a lot of work to do. I was speaking to an Italian journalist this morning on the way into the circuit, and he basically said that they've just gone wrong with the development. It very much reminded him, he said, of what happened with Aston Martin last year, where they got it wrong with their own development, and they've been struggling ever since to try and get out of it. He does not think that Ferrari will take so long. He does believe that they will eventually, hopefully in short order, get on top of it, and then to allow them to get back into that front-running mix again for those wins and poles.
Absolutely. And just to quickly go through the top 10 from today, it was obviously Lewis Hamilton victorious, with Max Verstappen in 2nd, Norris in 3rd, Oscar Piastri in 4th, who we will discuss tomorrow in the podcast because it was an interesting afternoon for him. Carlos Sainz in 5th, Nico Hulkenberg P6 for Haas, who we will mention in 1 second. Then the Aston Martins, Lance Stroll in 7th, Fernando Alonso in 8th, Alex Albon in 9th for Williams, with Yuki Tsunoda completing the top 10. Nico Hulkenberg, 6th yesterday, 6th today. I mean, you can see why he has attracted the interest of Audi, because what a performance yet again.
Just pulled an absolutely superb weekend out of the bag at a time when Haas really needed it, because they'd started to struggle, but they've come with this fantastic upgrade. Certainly on one side of the garage, because Nico has been able to deliver with it, of course.
Yeah.
Kevin, not quite at one with that car again this weekend, but Nico Hulkenberg, as you say, delivering a tremendous performance. That's given Haas a real shot in the arm in terms of the points accrued this weekend. in that battle in that second half of the Constructors' Championship with Alpine, with RB, with Stake, and with Williams. So that's propelled them up, and they're looking good right now. That's going to have those other 4 teams that I've mentioned a little bit worried. We're going to get a better idea as to just where that sits, and in Belgium, in Spa, in Hungary and Spa for these final 2 Grand Prix before we go into the August summer break. And if it performs again well there, 2 very contrasting circuits, if you think about the Hungaroring and Spa-Francorchamps, then they will be looking at certainly challenge potentially for even 6th place in the Constructors' Championship.
For sure. And we need to end this F1 update on Lewis Hamilton, because today feels like it's a significant moment for him. It's quite a significant moment for F1 because, as you mentioned, some people thought that genuinely we weren't going to see Lewis win again. He is ultimately the most successful driver in F1 history. Do you think this kind of feels like now almost the start of the Mercedes farewell tour? Because the first half of the season has been more of a nightmare up until, the last couple of rounds.
Yeah, as I mentioned a little bit earlier, Toto Wolff pretty much called it when he said, "We're back."
Yeah.
So, yes, most definitely, we are looking at a Mercedes team now, back in at the front of that pack. And Toto has confirmed as well that there are going to be upgrades on the car in both Hungary and Belgium. We've got to wait to see what Red Bull and McLaren might have to fight with, of course, but they've clearly now, again, as we've discussed previously, they've found this developmental direction. Finally, as Toto put it, something just clicked, just like that. The data then swooped them, has taken them on this course, and now it's just a case of building and building and building. And Mercedes arguably should become the team to beat over the second half of this season if they continue to go on this. Exactly, compared to where they were at the start of it. If they continue to carry on with this trajectory that they are currently on.
Well, F1 is definitely very exciting at the moment, with so many teams competing for victory, which makes it perfect timing that Racing News 365 are giving away tickets to this season's Belgian Grand Prix, which is now an absolute do not miss. In order to enter the competition, all you need to do is be subscribed to the RacingNews365.com YouTube channel and comment below who you want to take with you and why. I think I want to take my mum, for example, because she doesn't really watch F1 anymore, but the final laps had her on the edge of her seat. So there you go. Ian, amazing stuff as always. From myself and Ian, this has been the latest episode of the F1 Update. We will see you on Monday for the podcast. See you later.
As always, take care, folks.